We're going to jump right in here with the next session about a day in the life of a scientist. And we're fortunate enough to actually have a real live rocket scientist here to tell us about a day in his life, which is, I think, very exciting because we always joke about how something is not difficult and not equivalent to being a rocket scientist. And we actually have one to tell us just how difficult it actually is. So let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Amy Guttman. I'm a broadcast journalist and podcast host and moderator based in London. I cover current affairs and entrepreneurship and tech and startups and the confluence of entrepreneurship and geopolitical shifts around the world, with a particular focus on emerging markets. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Ozan Kara, and please do tell us more about yourself.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us. Just before introducing to myself, actually we couldn't have chosen such a good place called Fireside for a rocket talk. So that's amazing stage, amazing venue. Actually, yesterday during the reception and today I met with brilliant minds. And that's why I want to ask you some questions that inspire us during the journey to the space. And we will let you think during the session and we will ask your comments. So for me, actually, journey to the Mars is a challenging and more than 6 months journey. So if you were in this journey, what would be the 3 things you bring with you? Please think during the session and we will discuss after our session. So thank you so much. My name is Ozan Kara. I am working in TAI, Technology Innovation Institute, Propulsion and Space Research Center, and managing specific kind of rocket propulsion systems. And I'm involved in some international organizations, again, such as IAC and Space Generation Advisory Council all around the world. So I am really happy to engage with XPANSE. So we will have a nice talk and I will explain my journey as a rocket scientist.
And I love the question, you're going into space for 6 months, what 3 items would you take with you? So I'm very keen to hear what people come up with at the end. So I want to first start off, I'm not sure anybody wakes up one day as an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old or even a 15-year-old and says, hey, I know, I want to be a rocket scientist. So how did this dream come about for you?
Yeah, actually, most of the questions I get these similarly, but the one thing I remember when I was a kid, I was playing some toys with astronauts, but I was never thinking about the space industry, being an astronaut, and so on. I was playing with cars, so now I'm a race driver, that's okay. But for the space, I didn't have any idea. But when I started university, to be honest, the university education is the most important step of the life. It affects your vision and people you meet contribute your career path. So when I finished my undergrad education, I met with a professor from Stanford University. He was one of the pioneers in rocket systems. So it was by the chance, but we started research on master's and the PhD by the time I inspired in the space. In undergrad, I was aerospace engineering, and in my postgraduate, I was mechanical and aerospace. So that was actually became natural path. But as much as I jumped into the field, I gained too much hands-on experience and became a rocket field.
So I think most people are probably curious to know what are the career options on a practical level available to a rocket scientist? What does it mean to be a rocket scientist? And what kind of jobs could be available?
Yeah, actually, yes, we all hear about this being a rocket scientist is a complex thing, but actually it's not. So if you see a rocket system from top to bottom, you have a different materials, you have a chemical systems, which is the fuel, you have a different mechanisms, considered the mechanical design. So basically, any kind of engineering background can be implemented in the rocket system. The only condition is really critical. You should test as much as you can. If you have a system, a rocket system, it can be just small one, a component or the big one, you need to test. Otherwise, you cannot observe real application during the flight. So this is one important thing is as an engineer perspective and scientist.
Would you say that there are more opportunities for rocket scientists in the public sector, private sector, depends on the geography and how much they may be investing in and hoping to expand their space programs? Where do you see the most opportunities for young people who are considering it as a career choice?
Definitely. Actually, when I was in the aerospace engineering, the one question in my mind, can I work in the different country? I am from Istanbul, Turkey. So I was looking for options in Europe and US. Yes, the rocket field, if you jump through the military, it is restricted by each country. However, if you focus more space applications, if you go through more scientific studies and projects, you can work in any field, in any country, to be honest. So, of course, as I mentioned, there are the specific size of the rocket system. You can be an engineer and scientist in mechanical design, avionics integration and software. Then you can choose companies that we are lucky actually. Previously, when we have these first rocket systems, it started with the US and Russia with more government orientated. But now we are in entrepreneurship era. All the European-based companies who does the rocket is more entrepreneurship companies that's supported by the space agencies. So that's a really option for younger generations to dive into the field.
And what about your own path? What is your ultimate dream as a rocket scientist? What do you hope to achieve? What would be the pinnacle of your career?
Well, personally, so up to now, just quick recap what I did. I work in a company in Istanbul, Turkey, and develop some infrastructure to go to the space. So actually, some of the designs I did already operated in the space. That was amazing satisfaction for my side. To be honest, I always like to share my experience and teaching. That's my personal goal. That's I really love to engage with the next generations to share my knowledge. But for the career perspective, I would like to, of course, engage all this activity here in the UAE with the TII. So Technology Innovation Institute is an amazing R&D hub. Especially we develop the rocket infrastructure for the UAE for next generations.
I'm curious about the growth opportunities in this field because one of the things that I think people really look for, young people today really look for, is longevity, sustainability. Even though it's much easier to pivot careers than ever before, I think more and more we're looking for new and interesting and exciting opportunities within a sector. So how much do you see how much growth and expansion do you see within this industry globally and also here in the UAE?
Yeah, that's an amazing question because when we talk about the entrepreneurship, when we talk about the new companies and the next generation, we should estimate the growth, how companies grow in how many years. So my real example, to be honest, when we started the company in Turkey in 2017, we just started with a tiny rocket systems. Then in 5 years, we access to space, access the 120 kilometer altitude, access to space. It was a development of 5-year plan. So this is a real example. And if you look to other companies, for example, if you want to search, there is High Impulse in Germany, ISAR Aerospace in Germany. There is also Rocket Lab. Is a little bit beyond what we talk about entrepreneurship, but all these companies spend at least 4 to 5 years to expand their testing infrastructure, engineering skills, and the most important thing is where do you launch a rocket? That's extremely challenging. My colleagues in Germany, for example, in the High Impulse company or other companies in Europe, they are struggling to find the exact launch location. Because if you check the map, there is United States, there is Kazakhstan. These are the space agency-based launch platforms. But right now, there is a platform in Scotland. But if you want to get the permission, it takes maybe 6 months. But the rocketry doesn't wait 6 months. You cannot design a rocket and wait 6 months to launch it. So basically, that is the most challenging part. So roughly, technical way, 4 to 5 years to access the space with a specific design from the scratch. For the specifically UAE, we discussed to have the launch pad maybe in Oman, but these are all the discussions. We have a small island in military usage. We can launch maybe small prototype rockets. A rocket can fly maybe 7 kilometer altitude, 10 kilometer altitude, but no more than altitude. However, we will look for the opportunity for launch in the long-term future.
What are some of the biggest or most surprising challenges of going into space? What kind of juicy details or anecdotes can you share with us about going into space?
Yeah. Well, going to space is critical, but it's also fun. So basically, in the professional rocket systems such as SpaceX, they have a really good infrastructure to work with the astronauts. However, the most important thing is your system can withstand the G load when you launch from the launch pad. The most critical step of the rocketry. If you launch a rocket to the space, or just for the model rocket, the first 2 seconds, can you leave the launch pad? If you leave the launch pad, you are good. You can survive somehow. So that's the critical part of the launch systems. And then you should calculate the wind load. Where is the wind? What is the power of the wind? And etc. to calculate your trajectory. So that's also the critical part. But the most critical part is the launch. If you leave the launch pad, you are okay.
But let's rewind a little bit, because I know the training for an astronaut is very intense and is really includes multiple disciplines. So give us an insight. Give us a little snapshot of a day in the life of an astronaut who's training to go into space. What does that look like? Yeah. Physically, mentally?
Yeah. Actually, it's also really important and little bit changing by the commercial space. So when I met some of the astronauts 10 or 12 years ago in international conferences, one of the astronauts I met, Chris Hadfield, Canadian astronaut, who played the Space Oddity with his guitar. So he explained that all the processes to be astronaut is really tough. You have a daily test, physical test, and some papers to fill, and etc. But now it's more commercial. As far as I remember from the Axiom Space Company, which is a private company that you can contract and go to the space, that 2 Turkish astronauts already did with this platform. So basically you need to fill this fitness profile. However, right now it's easy. Because if you check the, let's say, findjobs.com similar websites in US, there is a job opportunity to be an astronaut. It's so easy. So even in Canada is like that. In US is like that. So in the space station, they wake up around 7, 8 o'clock. You will ask me how they can measure the time. They set the Greenwich time zone as a reference, and they do not open the windows of the space station not to affect from the sunlight. Otherwise, you don't sleep. So basically, this is how it starts. They have daily experiments to fill, like a blood test. They do some vision test, and they do some fitness. Because here in the gravity environment, there is a force, gravity force, pull us to the gravity center. But in space, you don't have this force. You feel different. And then your bones are weak. You need to practice. You need to do gym. There is a squat machine. There is a treadmill. So they do these 2 hours every day. So it's a progressive day.
And what about nutrition? Do they have to eat certain things, or it doesn't really matter?
Yeah, actually it doesn't matter because they eat pizza, they eat spinach, they eat honey. So actually there is one regulation, but to be honest, they are flexible, not like maybe 30 years ago. So that's also funny. So you can check the YouTube. There are really funny videos about how astronauts eat and so on.
And so when we're looking globally at what used to be called the Great Space Race, where do you think the most opportunities exist for young people pursuing a career in this field? Is it in the more established countries, like obviously the US has NASA, or are there actually more opportunities in countries where the space programs are less developed and are growing and are receiving investment? Where do you think the greatest opportunities lie for less experienced people?
Yeah, it's really good and informative question about young people in developing countries also. To be honest, I lived in Istanbul, Turkey. We were not that well developed. We were specifically, I was lucky to work in this rocket systems and the project and follow the international conferences. But in the big picture, yes, it is a good question that we should all consider. And I am really optimistic that I am in the space field more than 10 years, going to the United Nations conferences, all international space conferences around the world. What I see is the developing countries or regions like Africa or some of the parts of the Middle East, they have now space agencies. For example, Kuwait, they didn't have a space infrastructure, but now they have. In Saudi Arabia, they have a space agency. It's growing a lot. Now space became like more international field that all young people can find an opportunity to go to a more developed, let's say, institutions. So for me, it's a matter of how you research about the engage international events. That's why I highly suggest, especially young people, to follow International Astronautical Federation, Space Generation Advisory Council, or some of the different conferences all around the world to go. And there are too many funding opportunities from these institutions. For example, IAF, International Astronautical Federation, provide funding. If you are at the university, you can find from your university. So be active and try to engage all the community.
If we take that a step further, what kind of career path would you suggest? You must have found certain things or certain jobs that were more helpful to you climbing the ladder than others. So what would you suggest?
Yeah, actually, for the career steps, it definitely depends on your which step you are. Are you just finished the undergrad or are you postgraduate? So it's really important. But the most important thing is I can summarize. If you are doing a master's or the PhD, choose your advisor rather than the university. Of course, university infrastructure is important, but your advisor who will take you one step further is really critical in academia. So I was also teaching as an assistant professor, so I highly suggest these recommendations. In the environment, if you go to the career, the most important thing is it's really good to have an environment that you can do hands-on experiences, because everyone can understand the theory. But if you don't try, you never know. So it's good to focus to try it. So ask your advisor to try the test system, try to engage, check this firing. Do you have a material compatibility in the firing? Or how is your burn time? And it affects the flame and so on. All the details is important, but I can summarize like that.
Are there internships available in the field of rocket science and astronauts? Or
Yeah, definitely.
So would you suggest that as a good way to get hands-on experience?
Definitely. The companies I mentioned, the big picture, they all have the internship opportunities. And the good thing is now the space industry in the rocketry, in rocket systems, is going to be more and more opening to all around the world. All the European companies, they accept the interns from different countries. Even in the US, there are startups, but supported by the really good institutions. They also accept the students. So basically, it's a really good point.
Okay, so Ozan, before we open up for questions and before we try to find out what 3 items some of our participants would take you have to go first. What 3 items are going on your list to go to space?
I couldn't think. I was talking a lot. But to be honest,
How
yeah.
about
I would like to have my camera. I would like to take some pictures. So I would like to, of course, have a mobile phone. As all we do, we should connect the internet. And the one item, it's a good
anything
one.
sentimental? Nothing sentimental.
Maybe the pictures of my parents, or
Okay.
that could be nice.
Fair. Okay, so is anyone brave enough to tell us what 3 items, or even 1 or 2?
I see some space people. Marina is here.
Everyone is
Ramzi
very
is here.
curious.
Ramzi is a space person.
Even a favorite food? You would be allowed to take a favorite food, right? And not, yeah?
Yes, you are allowed to. If you go to space station, yes, you are allowed to have some food with you.
Okay, so for me, it would have to be really good coffee. That would be probably top of my list. Really, really good, kind of strong barista style coffee.
You're lucky. We can have in UAE. You can bring it from UAE to space.
Perfect, perfect. Are there any questions before we close? Thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you.